Over the recent days, all across Arizona, we have seen images, and we actually, KTAR News was at several of the churches recently, Monday and Tuesday, and particularly in Phoenix, where dozens of immigrants got off the bus, families, kids, little kids, sometimes babies, their parents. They had duffel bags and backpacks, and they walked into a church that was already set up to receive them with food, with blankets and clothing. Those buses, are these NGOs and non-governmental organizations that you work with, or is that coming from ICE that transports them directly to, say, the churches?
Well, I wasn't there, so I'm not sure. It could be either. Some NGOs have chartered some transportation. Most likely, they were our buses. I've seen at least one of your clips, and I could identify those as ICE buses that people were brought here from Yuma or Tucson Border Patrol stations. They were processed with putting an ankle bracelet on. They were given their conditions of release and told to report to an ERO office in a certain amount of days. And then they were transported to the shelter because we've already made those arrangements, and those numbers have already been worked with that group that, hey, we can receive 50 family members today at this time, and we coordinate that transportation to that shelter.
But where are they going? So once they end up at, say, a church, and some of them do have, we saw the ankle monitors, where can they freely roam around the country, and where are those court hearings scheduled? Is it here in Phoenix? Because what if somebody has family members, say, in the East Coast, but their hearing is here in Phoenix? Is that something, do you know where they're going?
We know where they're going, where they tell us they're going. They give us an address that we verify, and that's where their court dates are sent to that address. So generally, I would say over 95% of the people are not staying in the state of Arizona. Most of them are going east of Arizona and generally to the East Coast, but different states throughout the United States. So based on what they tell us at processing, that's where we send their documents, and that's also where we tell them to report to an ERO office within 7 to 10 days to check in as a measure of complying with their release. If they don't do that, if they don't check in, if they cut that ankle bracelet, they're subject to arrest and being detained. They're also subject to federal prosecution for destruction of government property or hindering their removal efforts. So those are possibilities which they're explained to them at the time that they sign the paperwork that they're going to be released.
But if they do skip out on a court date, or they do cut off their ankle monitor, do you have the resources to go after them, and will you go after them?
Well, it depends on where they cut their bracelet off. Generally speaking, they're not cutting them off in the state of Arizona. When they do, they might cut them off in North Carolina. I don't operate North Carolina, so I can't, excuse me, I can't say that they have the resources or not. I can tell you that we have employees here that is their main job, that if an ankle bracelet is cut off, it sends an alert to emails, and it gives us a GPS location of where that bracelet was cut off, and my officers respond to that location to look for the individuals and to recover the device.
That's a lot more work for you and your agents in your office.
Yes, it is.
Do you have the resources to handle large volumes, as we're seeing large volumes of people being released?
We are keeping up with what is coming today. If it gets worse, I don't know. I think our biggest issue is are we going to continue to have NGO support that can sustain this many people being dropped off at their faith-based organizations, and can they sustain helping them transporting to airports and bus stations and providing shelter for 1 or 2 days?
Let's talk about those NGOs and then the relationship that you have with these groups. So do you just pick up the phone and say, hey, I have a group of people that are being released? Do they just respond, or what's the process for you to get them involved to help with this process?
So again, we've been involved with many of these groups for several years. So this is nothing new. What's new is the volume. So before it may have been, we're going to send you 50 people every Wednesday. And now it may be, we're going to send you 50 people every day, right? So it depends on what they're able to accept and sustain. And so we have point of contacts with these NGOs. They have our information, and we're in communication with them every day on what they can kind of take, if they can take more family units for the day, or in 2 days, and they're really doing that based on their volunteer support that are helping kind of provide the food, the shelter, the communication, and also when people go to a bus station, say 20 people go to a bus, now maybe they have room to house 20 more. So it's a constant dialogue between us and the NGOs that are assisting.
You don't ultimately call a church or a faith-based organization. You go through the NGOs to help you coordinate that?
Well, these NGOs are generally faith-based organizations. We have a point of contact with 2 or 3, and they talk to all of their other partners. So that's kind of how it operates.